Hi, this is ACI Course 1, The Principal Teachings of Buddhism. We're at Class 10, Karma and Emptiness, the Nature of Wisdom and Liberation. Last class, we completed our discussion of the three views of dependent origination. The functionists believe that things are dependent on their causes. The independents believe that all things exist dependent on their parts. And the consequence or implication school believes that all things exist dependent on you calling them and thinking of them as you do. This led us into the understanding of the concept the gaksha, the object we deny, or no self. Since the functionalists believe that everything that exists is dependent on causes, for them the gaksha is a self that has no causes. The object that they deny is a self that would have no causes. The independents believe that the self that exists independent of its parts does not exist. And the consequent school believes that a self that exists independent of us thinking about it or naming it could not possibly exist. So those are the three flavors of no self. At the end of this class, you should be able to understand the relationship between karma and emptiness and know when you have correct view. Let's turn now to the root text. Jason Kappa tells us, "You've yet to realize the thought of the able as long as two ideas seem to you disparate. The appearance of things, infallible interdependence, and emptiness beyond taking any position." So the thought of the able being kind of capitalized, you get the idea it's going to be a realized being. And then the two things are going to be our dependent origination and our emptiness. And so he's telling us that somehow these two ideas are very connected, and we haven't really got it yet if we somehow are holding them separate. So let's look at those two different ideas. How does the pen exist? Well, there's two different views. There's the positive view, which is going to be it's dependent, and the pen is going to be dependent on its causes, its parts, us naming it, different flavors of its dependence. Emptiness says simply that it's not self-existent, so that it does depend on something. So emptiness is this concept that's basically saying, hey, it's not just out there, it's not solid like it looks. It's actually dependent on something. Now the highest view is that it's really dependent on our karmic projections. So the pen has its emptiness, and because of its emptiness, we're able to project our karmic seeds onto it. So if we have positive karmic seeds, we would see a pen that works. And when that karma ran out, we would then have a pen that stops working, which might be an unpleasant event. This is the key to us reaching nirvana and Buddhahood. The idea is to create positive karma that's not going to run out on us, so that we are perpetually creating pleasant events in our life. And that's what Buddhas learn how to do, basically. It's like we know atomic fission, where we've struck an atom and divided it in half, creates incredible destruction. Atomic warfare is based on this idea of chopping an atom in half and breaking it into pieces, which then releases all this power. In contrast, Buddhahood is kind of like atomic fusion, where if you can get fusion to happen, you have an unlimited amount of power as well, but it's not destructive. It continually perpetuates itself, and it's usable power without creating the nasty radioactivity type stuff. So fusion is another way of thinking about it, is that you've got this perpetual bliss machine once you figure out this whole way that emptiness and karma works. So the middle way sages say, and here's a quote from them, that nothing exists naturally, but not nothing exists at all. And everything exists by convention, but not everything exists naturally. So let's take it apart piece by piece. nothing exists naturally. Well, naturally is referring to if something was self-existent, if it was solid and it was there and there was no causes and it was just always going to be there. And as it appears, when we look around and we see the different objects in the room, they look pretty solid. They look like, hey, that's always going to be there. That pen is always going to be a pen. It's a pen. So nothing exists that way. Nothing exists naturally, but nothing exists at all. So here we're saying that, hey, that doesn't mean things don't exist. They're real. Geshe Michael used to say, hey, if you don't believe this pen is real, come on up here. I'll give you a Hitler mustache with it. It's real. It works. So we're not saying that nothing exists at all. We're just saying nothing exists naturally in the sense that it's self-existent. The next thing is everything exists by convention. So this is emphasizing that everything exists dependent on other things. And we have our conventional reality, which sees things as if they're solid, but the truth is they're actually dependent on other things. So there's this conventional reality where we see things, and everything exists. It's again, the pen does exist conventionally. It will work. It will give you a mustache. But that doesn't mean it exists naturally. So everything doesn't exist naturally, again, which means it's self-existent and it's solid like that. It's always going to be that way. This is the quote that emphasizes the two extremes, which you're supposed to avoid when you're studying emptiness and dependent origination. The two extremes are nothing exists at all, I have them in bold here, and everything exists naturally. So there's a tendency to start thinking, it's like, well, if nothing exists naturally, well, nothing really exists at all, and this is all illusion, which means I can do anything because, ethics doesn't matter, and those towels I'm stealing from the hotel they don't really exist, and, so forth and so on. So that's one of the extremes that's very dangerous. That's why we're called the middle way, because we're trying to stay in the middle between these two extremes, that nothing exists at all, or that everything exists naturally. So we've got, on one hand, we're saying nothing exists, and on the other hand, we're saying, yes, everything is solid, it's fixed, it's unchangeable, it exists, and it's out there, and I can't do anything about it. So when bad things happen to me, it's because they're just bad things that happen. So that's the everything exists naturally extreme, where everything exists, and I don't have any control over it, and it just is, and it's unchanging. So those are the two extremes we're trying to avoid. We need to understand that, yes, everything exists and it works, but basically we're looking at what created it. What is the cause? And in this case, it's almost like the functionalist school, because we're saying what's the cause, but the cause is a higher level thinking, because we're saying everything's caused by karmic projections. That everything we see, and that again back to the 4th chapter of the Amardhammakosha, when we were talking about karma, it started out that deeds create the worlds. So everything is created by deeds, which is karma, right? Because karma is the movement of the mind, and what the mind motivates, which is our actions, which are our deeds, and our speech, which is another verbal deed. So everything's created this way, and it's because it's because of the emptiness of everything that we're able to project onto those things. We're able to label those things. We're able to experience them as good or bad in terms of whether we enjoy them or don't enjoy them. Jason Kappa says next, at some point they no longer alternate, come together. Just seeing that interdependence never fails brings realization that destroys how you hold to objects, and then your analysis with view is complete. So we start seeing that, hey, everything's dependent on something, and how that because it's empty, it allows us to see how we're creating those objects, or at least creating our experience of those objects, depending on kind of what view you want to hold. And once you get that, once every time you see something and you say, hey, that person is yelling at me because I've done something in the past and yelled at someone, and therefore have created a seed which then forces me to see this again. I'm forced to see someone yelling at me because I yelled at someone in the past, and it's because they're empty that I'm seeing this. I see them as an unpleasant person because they're yelling at me. That's not nice. But other people, maybe people who don't like me, say, hey, this person's great. I really like that they're yelling at her. So that's their emptiness. I'm seeing them as unpleasant. Other people might be seeing them as pleasant. So there's a certain level of emptiness there. And how I'm experiencing them is going to be based on my own karma. This is what we can leverage to create a Buddha paradise. This is what we leverage to get out of samsara. And once you really get it, every time it actually starts killing off those seeds right away, because as soon as you get that, you can change what you're seeing by changing the karmic seeds you're planting. Then that's the realization that not only destroys how you hold the objects, but destroys the ignorance you've had, destroys what's been keeping you chained in samsara. Because you can never hold to it. Once you have this realization, you're not going to hold to an object as being, it would be ridiculous for you to say, hey, that person's a bad person. Because that would be a label that's like solid, like they have no emptiness. You could talk about your experience. I've experienced that person to be, I am experiencing uncomfortable things, unpleasant things coming from that person, but you don't hold the object the same way. And so you don't have the same response. And that's if you look back to those 8 worldly thoughts, and it's not the thought that's so much of the problem. It's not being happy when you get something. It's what that might motivate you to do. It might motivate you, since you're clinging to that something to get it. You might be motivated to lie or to steal it in order to achieve it. So this starts catching. If you realize that, hey, I'm not going to get that thing, right? If I want to see somebody giving me that thing, then I'm going to need to give something to someone else. If you start getting that that's really how you create the karma, you create the reality to receive things is by giving, then you're not going to do things like lie and steal in order to get objects, because you realize that that's not how it works. The only thing that will bring is someone lying to you and stealing from you in the future. So once you start seeing all the objects around you, pleasant or unpleasant, as a result of your karma, because they're empty, then your analysis with view is complete. And then you're solid. You've gotten the 3 principal paths. You've got the last correct view, and that's the one that'll break the pattern for you, to be able to allow you to end samsara. Well, that's the end of Course 1, The Principal Teachings of Buddhism, the end of Class 10. There's 2 questions in the homework, and I think we've covered everything you need for that. The idea that karma can coexist with emptiness. In fact, they seem dependent on each other. It's the fact that things are empty that allows your karma to play out. And we also know that if we keep seeing things that there's no self-existent thing, then we realize that, if I want to stop bad things from happening to me, if I want unpleasant things to stop from happening to me, then I need to change my behavior, change my thoughts, change my actions, and the results will naturally follow. Your memorization assignment, memorize the 12th verse of the 3 principal paths. And then for meditation, do an analytical meditation on the marriage, the relationship between ethics and emptiness. And write down the date and time of your meditation. The final exam will be based on the quizzes, so when you're studying you can just focus on the quiz material. I think that's pretty much it. We've just completed a course, we've just completed a class where we talked about emptiness, correct view, and the actual key to freedom. So let's dedicate this to the benefit of all sentient beings. May they find peace and freedom themselves. Thank you, and bless you. Hi, this is ACI.